So you want to get into reading? Welcome to the dark side. So much better. Shh, don't tell anyone. I know someone who is just now getting into reading will absolutely adore this book. To be fair, her writing is so good. This reminds me a little bit of Alexis and what's that guy's name from Schitt's Creek? Insane. And I have annotated the crap out of this book. Just being so in love with this book. It's amazing. Hello book friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Kaylin and I hope you are doing so lovely. Welcome to another sit down Sunday video. Today I'm going to be recommending books for people who are just getting into reading, have no idea where to start. I got you. I have 10 recommendations for you guys, so let's just jump right in. Before we jump in, make sure you guys are subscribing. Make sure you guys are following me on the social medias because that's where I'm most active at. But let's get into some book recommendations. Okay, these have no particular order at all. I just kind of looked through my shelf and grabbed some books. I wanted to grab more than 10, but I thought, Kaylin, you don't want to film for an hour. Okay, you don't want this video to be an hour long. No, I do not. However, my vlogs, I love being an hour vlog. My sit down videos, nope, I'm in and out quick. I tried to do like adult and YA of each genre. I don't know if it went well, we'll see. So the first kind of genre I'm going to be talking about is romance. Romance, I think, is a really good genre to go into if you don't know where to start. Typically, a lot of people love romance books. Romance books are one of the easier genres to get into, I think, because a lot of people, no matter who you are, where you are, what you do, yada, 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 can relate to something in a romance book. And so that's why I'm starting with romance. The first one is a YA series, and a lot of people know about this book. You may already know about this book series, but if you don't, it's To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. This is Jenny Han's, is this her first series or is The Summer I Turned Pretty the first series? I don't know. Either way, even though The Summer I Turned Pretty has a special place in my heart, I'm not recommending that because I like this one so much better. Shh, don't tell anyone. I just think the characters are so much better. I think the writing is good. I don't know, and maybe because I really loved the movies we got with them. I'm not quite sure what it was about this book series that I loved over The Summer I Turned Pretty. In this series, we're following Laura Jean, who is a high school student, and she wrote love letters to all her crushes throughout her life. And her little sister decides to mail them, and they get mailed to each of her crushes, and one of them happens to be one of the boys at her high school, which is dating her ex-best friend. I forget his name. It's been a really long time. Oh, Peter. His name is Peter, and they start fake dating and then eventually fall in love. I really like this series a lot. For adult romances, I got a couple different options because I couldn't narrow them down. 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. This is a kind of recent-ish read of mine. This is one of the romance books that I absolutely loved. I'm pretty picky with my romance books, and if I love this one, I know someone who is just now getting into reading will absolutely adore this book. In this book, we're following Eva, who writes erotic novels for a living, and she is also a single mother, and she has a disability that you can't actually see. It affects her internally. And when she was younger, she fell in love with Shane. I'm really bad at remembering summaries. I'm really sorry. She fell in love with Shane for a week. They spent like a wild week together, and then they went their separate ways. And Shane is also an author, and they're writing to each other in their books until one summer in New York, they meet up again because he comes to a convention, and they spend yet another week together, reminiscing, maybe falling back in love. I don't know, but I really love this book a lot. People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. If you don't know who Emily Henry is, or if you've heard the name floating around, circling on YouTube, the Instagram, the TikTok, the Threads, whatever social media app it may be, she's a very well-known adult romance author, or is she contemporary romance? She might be contemporary romance. To be fair, her writing is so good, and I feel like it gets better and better as her books go on. This one, you're following Poppy and Alex, who are best friends. They take a vacation every single year together until one summer something happens between them, and then they don't speak for a year. And a year later, Poppy invites Alex on one last vacation to try to fix their relationship, and yeah, stuff goes down. I think the reason why I really, really love this book is because, one, I really love, like, seeing Alex and Poppy and how different they were from each other. Poppy is like your eccentric, happy-go-lucky, go-with-the-flow type of girl. She is a travel blogger, and then you have Alex, who's a teacher, who's very type A, straight lace, and I love seeing the dynamic between them two, and seeing Poppy bring stuff out in Alex and Alex bring stuff out in Poppy, and it's just so good. Trust me on this. Next is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. Abby Jimenez is actually one of my favorite romance authors ever. She was the first romance author besides like YA that I actually read as an adult. I'm just gonna go ahead and read the summary because it's been a year and I can't quite remember it. After a wild bet, gourmet grilled cheese sandwich, and a cuddle with a baby goat, Alexis Montgomery has had her world turned upside down. The cause? Daniel Grant, a ridiculously hot carpenter who's 10 years younger than her and as casual as they come, the complete opposite of sophisticated city girl Alexis. And yet their chemistry is undeniable. While her ultra-wealthy parents want her to carry on the family legacy of world-renowned surgeons, Alexis doesn't need glory or fame. She's fine with being a mere ER doctor. And every minute she spends with Daniel in the tight-knit town where he lives, she's discovering she's just what's really important. Yet letting their relationship become anything more than short-term fling would mean turning her back on her family and giving up the opportunity to help thousands of people. Bringing Daniel into her world is impossible, yet she can't give up the joy she's found with him either. With so many differences between them, how can Alexis possibly choose between her world or his? Yes, okay, so I just remember really loving Daniel. Daniel is like a golden retriever boyfriend. Like, honestly, he's so great, and he lives on this cute bed and breakfast that he runs, and he sells these gorgeous wood pieces, and this reminds me a little bit of Alexis and what's that guy's name from Schitt's Creek? The farm boy, the mayor's son. If you've watched Schitt's Creek, you know what you're talking about. However, Alexis is not like that Alexis. Like, she's not like Alexis on Schitt's Creek's personality, but the story of Alexis coming from a really rich family and then, you know, falling in love with a farmer boy is kind of the same ideal. So, I don't know, this was just really fun to read. I read it in one sitting. Even though it is a little bit longer than your typical romance, I still really recommend it, and I think you guys will absolutely love it. Let's talk about contemporary literary fiction. I'm not quite sure what genres these two fit into, but I have two here, two of my favorite books. First one I'm going to talk about is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. If you haven't heard of this book by now, let me indulge ya. So you are following Daisy, who grew up in this pretty privileged family, pretty privileged life. And from a young age, she goes out on the streets kind of discovering all that is to discover in Hollywood. She's exposed to alcohol, drugs, and sex at a very young age, kind of shaping into who she is today. And all she wants to do is write songs. That's literally all she wants to do. And one day she gets her, I guess, her fame, her 15 seconds of fame, and the band The Six finds her song and wants to record with her, and then the song was such a hit they form a band together, Daisy Jones and the Six. And this is told in interview style, so if you don't know kind of what that is, basically how this is set up is essentially you have a narrator who's asking them questions, but you don't really hear from the person who's asking the questions until the very end of the book, and then every single character is telling their own point of view in this book. And I would say it's an unreliable narrator. Like, Daisy and Billy, because of stuff that has happened, can't really be reliable, and if you've read this book, you kind of know why. That's how I kind of think of this book. This is one of those books that changed me, that like fed my soul, that this was something that whenever I'm just not having a great time, or if it's been a while since I've really loved a book, I go back to this book and just reread it because this makes me fall in love with reading all over again. I don't know if you can see, but the tabs that are on this book are quite literally insane, and I have annotated the crap out of this book. I've wrote in it, I've drawled in it, I've cried on this book, I've laughed on this book. Like this, I just absolutely adore this book. And I think if you're getting into reading for the first time and you don't exactly want a romance, you don't want a thriller, you don't want like a fantasy, and you just want a book that you can get lost into and really fall in love with the characters in the world, I think this book is the one for you. And also it's a really quick read. And side note, if you can, I would get the audiobook version of this and follow along, because the audiobook has a full cast of characters and it is so good just to hear the emotions in the voice actor's voice, I think takes this book to another level. Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. Fredrik Backman is a favorite author of mine. I read this book. This was my first ever book I read from him. This was kind of the first book that I read in one sitting. I've always been a reader growing up and then kind of fell in love with it. And then of course, like every other person, 2020 rolls around, there's nothing to do, I get back into reading. And this was one of the books that I picked up. And at the point in my life, I was going through some stuff. And if you watch my vlogs, I kind of explain it in the beginning of my YouTube history. And I just needed something to get lost into. I sat down with this book and literally stayed up till 3 a.m. reading this book because it's just so good. So in this book, you're following actually a couple different people. It's basically a group of people who go and visit the same apartment on the same day. And there just so happens to be a bank robbery gone wrong across the street, and the robber actually gets into the apartment and holds them all hostage. And you get to see each character and a peek inside their life and like why they're there, what's going on in their life. And there's just a lot of different elements to this book that when going into this book, you don't really know. And I don't really want to say too much because I don't want to give anything away, but I remember just crying and laughing and just being so in love with this book. Give this book a shot. Next is fantasy. I love fantasy. Fantasy is one of the genres that I really gravitate towards because you can get lost in it. It's peak escapism, in my opinion. So I actually only have two, because fantasy I think is a genre that's a little harder to start with if you are a reader for the first time, or if you're just starting out on your reading journey. I don't want to recommend a 500-page book and you be like, what? So I'm recommending 400-page books. But I have two. One is YA and one is new adult. These are really popular series, and the reason why I'm picking them is because they're popular for a reason, and I feel like these are both really perfect for people who don't want to dip their toes in the fantasy genre but don't really know what to expect in fantasy genre. There's different types of like subgenres in fantasy. You have fantasy romance, you have epic fantasy. That's the only fantasies I can think of, but these are both, I would say, one's a romantasy, which is fantasy and a romance, a fantasy romance, and one's just like a strict fantasy, but has elements of a romance, but it's not fully focused on the romance. Does that make sense? Probably not. But the first one is Carvel by Stephanie Garber. This one, I ate this book up. It took me years to pick this book up, simply because I was just putting it off, and I don't know why, because this book is so good. You are following Scarlett and Donatella, or Tella. I think her real name's Donatella. Tella is her nickname. And they are both sisters, and they have this really awful dad who's really abusive towards them. Not very nice, okay? And they have always dreamed of going to Carvel. And Carvel is this event that goes on for 5 nights, and no one really knows kind of what goes on. There's speak of it, but no one really knows until they get into it because it changes every single year. And one year they get invited because Scarlett sends a letter that like her and her fiance want to go or something. She sends a letter every single year to go, and this year she just so happens to get invited. And so they go, and she goes with this sailor and her sister, and what they don't know is when they get there, Donatella is part of the games. Like, she disappears, so the whole game are surrounded by finding Tella, and you don't know what's real and what's fake with these games. It's very elaborate, it's very fantastical. There's a little bit of romance, but not too much in this book that's going to be overwhelming and overwhelm what the books are really about. If you like fairy tales, I think you would really like this book. It's, again, super easy to consume and read and just get lost into this world. Please read it. Now, the next book I'm going to show you is one that goes around a lot. Okay, I don't really have to say much about it. A Court of Thorn and Roses. This is my original copy that I got as the books were being released. Sadly, I don't have all of my copies because past me sold A Court of Wings and Ruin, which was the only, like, the last book that was out when I was last into reading, and I don't know why I sold that book, but I kept this one in A Court of Mist and Fury, thank God. In this book, you're following Farah, who's 19, and she goes out to hunt for her family because she is the only one that can, or else the family won't eat. And she ends up killing this wolf, and she thinks she scored it big. Little does she know that this wolf was actually a fairy. It was part of the Fae, and that night, another beast-like creature comes and says, I need you to come with me or I'm killing you and your entire family. So she chooses to go with him, and she has to live in the world of the Fae. Humans know of the Fae, they just know it's a very bad land and they don't really trust the Fae, but she goes and she finds out this beast-like creature is named Tamlin, who is the king, and he has to break this curse that's currently on his land. And yeah, that's all I'm gonna say. This book, one of the first fantasy books I read, and when I tell you I did not move from my parents' couch until I was done with this book, I mean, I did not move. This is all I did. And it's so cool to see new readers reading this series and having the same feelings. I feel like if you're gonna take any book rec out of this entire video, please be ACOTAR. Last genre is thriller. I only have two. Thrillers are another one of my favorite genres to speak about, to read, to consume, to do all the things, and narrowing it down to two is very hard, but these two are the two that really stuck out to me. We have a YA and an adult. So I'm gonna start with adult because this is the one I gab about to anyone. And if you've watched my videos before, you've probably seen this book probably 100 times, but you know what? If you're just not finding my channel, you have no idea that I recommend this book every single video. The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. And in this one, you're following this woman whose husband is a photographer, and he comes home late one night and she shoots him in the face and she never speaks again. And then insert the therapist who is trying to get her to speak. And that's literally all I'm going to say about this book, and that's all you should know about this book, because when I tell you this is the only book in my entire reading career that has shook me to my core with the twist, I'm being dead serious. I've never found another thriller book that shocked me to my core with the twist. I mean, mouth open, I could not believe it. I was like, did I just read that? Am I like digesting that correctly? However, I will say a lot of people say the first half of this book is pretty slow. I don't remember it being slow, but again, I'm a thriller reader, so I knew in order to get to the good part, I had to get past the beginning. So I don't know, but it's pretty short. I recommend everyone to read this book. Literally, like anyone who's like, hey Kaylin, what's a book recommendation? Here you go, here you go, here you go, here you go. I read this on audio for my first time, and I ended up loving it so much, I bought a hardcover copy because I needed this on my shelf because it's incredible. Next is Ace of Spades. This one is described as a Gossip Girl meets Get Out. Now, I'm really not going to go into too much detail about this book other than you're following private academy students, and they're being targeted by the aces who kind of think of Gossip Girl, like how she sends out anonymous text messages. That's kind of the same vibe that's Get Out, except it's more deadly. Like this Ace character plays pranks on them. Some are really awful. This book, I think, is a book that everyone needs to read just because the social commentary in this book and like just the things that are in this book that this book deals with, I think everyone should read about. And honestly, it's a good book. It's so good. And I get so happy seeing people talk about this book. Like, this book, I think, is circulating around this year, which is odd because it came out in 2020. But then again, books don't really have an expiration time and when you can read them, which is why I'm saying read this book. But I just love seeing people love this book. And I mean, if you love Get Out and Gossip Girl, this is the book for you. And this is this author's first ever book. I was shocked to hear that because it's just so good. Okay, you guys, those are my book recommendations for you if you are wanting to get into reading. If you have any book recommendations for me, let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you read any of these books because you've watched this video, come back and let me know how you liked them or if you didn't like them. It's okay. You can be completely honest here. But that's it for today's video. I hope you guys loved it. If you did, make sure you guys give it a big thumbs up. Make sure you guys are subscribing because I would love to have you here. I put out weekly vlogs every single Wednesday and videos on Sundays when I can. Not every single Sunday, but you know, 2 Sundays out of the month mainly. I hope you guys are doing well and I hope you guys are reading lots of good books and I hope you guys are being kind to yourself and to one another, and I will see you guys in my next video.